Hello lovely people, I'm Catherine and welcome to this week's coverlet of comfort. This is the last week for October and I'm going to, or I have been already as you can see, do some stitching around my squares. Now I've obviously started, I knew it was going to be quite time consuming, and Joey's here, as many of you know already, my son. So I've been sitting in the evening and doing some stitching, but don't worry, I shall catch you up. So what I've done is I've made a grid around all my squares and I've used the double running stitch, which is a stitch that is commonly used in Indian cantha embroidery, and I've done it in black and white. It's actually an off-white because I didn't want, you know, glaring white. I didn't have black and white embroidery floss, so I've been using this is vintage darning cotton. And it's very fine, it's 4-stranded, and I've been using 3 strands, which kind of equals my normal 2 strands of floss. So I'll show you how to do that. I've left one line here to do with you. And then I've been going through, and it's not whipping, it's threading. So we've done before the whipped running stitch, where you keep threading another thread through the stitching, but always from the same side. This is threading, so you go back and forth, and I've been using 2 colours. And I'll talk a little bit about what that represents for me as I'm going along. But basically, to begin with, you just do a running stitch. Now I've got my background linen is checked, so I've kind of got guidelines already within the checks. But if you will, because it's a grid and it kind of, you know, is obvious if it goes wibbly wobbly, do feel free to draw yourself lines. You could just use a normal pencil because you're going to cover it up, you know, if you want to. If you don't mind going wibbly wobbly, go wibbly wobbly. So I'm going to start with my 3 strands of the white first. It doesn't really matter which you do first, but I started with the white, so I'm being consistent because I think you can kind of slightly see a difference in the stitching between the one you did first and the one you did second. So I'm going to have to turn this around. So I've got a knot in my thread as per usual. And I've got sort of up the centre of my 2 squares, there's this orange line in the check, so I'm going to use that as a guideline. So I'm going to come up on the edge of my line here. I mean, if you're starting with your first line, you just come up wherever the edge of your grid is. Or just to say as well, I have checked with my piece against my September piece that I can go, you know, where I can stitch into my excess cloth at the side so that it still sits within the stitching on the September piece, if that makes sense. And then I also checked with the final length when I joined those two pieces together that my stitching here wouldn't end up being hidden in a seam, if that makes sense. I don't mind if there's some of this showing. I don't mind if my seam ends up kind of right out here somewhere when I join it. But I didn't want my seam to end up, you know, where my stitching is. So just be a little bit aware of that when you're planning. It's a little bit of planning ahead required. Come up there. And then I'm just basically just going to do a running stitch, but I am going to pay a little bit of attention that I get the stitch and the space roughly the same size. Now, it doesn't have to be exact. If you look into mine, you'll see that some stitches are bigger than others. But just, you know, do the best you can, just as a general guideline. So my stitches are about 3/16 of an inch. They're not quite a 1/4 inch and they're bigger than an 1/8, so they're somewhere between the two. So I'm just paying a little bit of attention to make sure that my stitch and my space is about the same length. And I'm just going to do that all the way along. I'll just talk about what happens when you cross a line, because you need room to thread afterwards your other threads. So I'll just stitch along to this junction just so I can talk you through that, and then I'll explain a little bit about my thinking behind the meaning, the story that this stitching's telling within the concept of the you know, the October Fragments, which has become, I started off calling it Fragments of Life, but it's become more Fragments of Memories. So I'm coming up to here, I'm just eyeballing this space, which I've talked about before, and you can just adjust the stitch and the space length slightly if necessary, but I just want to make sure that I end up meeting the line. I don't want a stitch to jump right across the line, because that might get in the way when I come to do the threading. So I think I can get a stitch, a space and a stitch in that gap I've got left. So I'm just going to adjust my stitch length slightly just so I can go stitch, space. Don't stress too much about it, you know, it's all, there's going to be so much going on it's not going to notice, but this is just what you're aiming for. So now for this stitch I want it to come just next to that black stitch, just sort of, I hope you can see, I'll zoom you in when I'm editing, that, you know, I'm just coming up, I'm not crossing it, just coming up just next to it, and then coming out underneath it, and then carrying on with my line. I'm just going to do that all the way along. So in terms of the storytelling this month, the fragments of memories, we've all our little squares related to memories of different kinds. So I thought that the black and white kind of represents the everyday life that goes on, you know, the sort of the idea of a black and white film as opposed to a full colour. So it's kind of like the humdrum, the mundane, I guess you might call it, you know, just the day-to-day, not the highlights, just the regular, you know, the regular stuff. So that's what I thought the black and white would represent. And then the threading I'll talk about when I come to do the threading. I'm just judging again here so that I meet that junction nicely. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to come out on my line, so I'm just going to come out just slightly the other side of it, just so they cross nicely, and then on I go again. And I'm not worrying here if some of my squares are different sizes, like you'll see here that the gap here is more or less the same, but here this square's a bit smaller, so there's a bigger gap here and a smaller gap here. That happens all over, but I think the overall look is nice. I'm happy with it, so I'm not stressing about that. I'm just doing a straight line. And if the gaps get different, then the gaps get different. I am sitting in the kitchen. I know you don't all watch the Monday journaling video, but I told you in that I'd move my desk into the kitchen. In Friday's Part-Home Life I'll probably show you. I showed my people on Ko-fi in the last Saturday's bonus video. But I'll show you on Friday because I have now put some little shelves up as well. And I've got my camera stand up on one of the shelves, and I think it's better, at least I hope it is. Well, it's better for me, I mean I hope it's as good for you. But the other thing I've done is I've moved the clock into the kitchen, because I know many of you like to hear the clock ticking. So I've had a bit of a change around, and I've now got the clock up on one of the shelves in the kitchen so you can hear it. Okay, so I'm just approaching the far side now. And it doesn't matter if you do the verticals first or the horizontals first or whatever. I think I did a vertical then a horizontal just because that was how much thread there was in my needle. You know, there's enough to stitch a long line and a short line per one thread length, per one Lazy Girl thread length. But I don't think it doesn't really matter because you're just paying attention at the junctions anyway. That last stitch is going to be a little bit big, but I don't mind. So I'll just go through to the back and finish that off. And then I'll get 3 strands of the black in my needle. Just to reiterate, I'm using 3 strands because this thread is thinner. If I was going to use embroidery floss, if I'd had black and white, I would have used 2 strands. Okay, so now I've got the black and the black, and I said the black and white. Now I've got the black in my needle, and I've gone back to the beginning of my line, and now I'm going to come up just at the end of this first white stitch. So I'm going to try and come up in the same hole, but I'm not going to stress about it as long as I get somewhere in the region of it. And then I'm going to stitch down into the hole where the next stitch is coming out of. Basically I'm putting another running stitch. You see, it's quite hard to get in the exact hole, so if it goes slightly to one side it doesn't really matter. It will be partially covered anyway by the threading. So yeah, basically I'm just stitching a black stitch in the gaps between the white stitches. Jude Hill uses this stitch quite a lot. In fact, if you Jude Hill Spirit Cloth, if you don't know who she is, she does have a channel here on YouTube. She does have some videos up. but she hasn't made videos here for quite a long time, I don't think. But she does have a lovely blog. I think it's called Cloth Whisperer, and she's on Instagram. If you look up Spirit Cloth or Jude Hill, you'll find her. Yeah, if you really sort of study her work, you'll see there are a lot of Cantha influences, Cantha embroidery influences in her work, but done in her own unique way. I just love it. Her work is just so inspiring. I know many of you love it as well. But she uses this black and white stitching quite a lot, and she calls it magic stitch, I believe. So when I come up to the junction here where the white stitch is disappearing behind that black stitch, I'm just going to kind of work my needle in underneath and come up. It doesn't, you can go over, if the thread's the same colour, it wouldn't have mattered if I'd gone slightly over or slightly under. Even if it's not the same colour, it doesn't matter. I just like to tell you all the finickiness, but hopefully without putting pressure on you to feel that you have to be finicky. But we're all different. Some of us like to be super precise when we work, and some of us are, you know, embrace the wonky and don't mind being a bit slapdash. So I try and tell you all the little hints and tips, and, you know, all the wrinkles and the possible pitfalls, if you want to call it like that, and then you absolutely feel free to do you and do it in as precise or as wonky a way as makes you happy without getting stressed about it. And the clock tried to chime, but I have got the chimes turned off because Joey's here this week, and the clock was in the living room where he is sleeping, and he didn't like it chiming all night. Woke him up. Yeah, he's gone out for the day. He's gone to visit a friend of his that lives in Southampton, and so he's gone on the train, and he'll be back this evening. It's nice for him. It was quite an old school friend from when we lived here before, so that's nice for him to be able to go and do that. Oh dear. Yeah, the only real important thing with those junctions is that you don't stitch right across the middle of a stitch, and you'll see why when we come to do the threading. That you try and have the stitches meeting rather than crossing. I hope that makes sense. Hopefully it will become clearer if it's not clear now when we come to do the threading. So one more stitch, and I'll just go straight through to the back. And then I shall talk about the threads I've got to do the threading. So this is called threaded, I guess it would be called threaded double running stitch if you were going to give it its full title. And the advantage of threading or whipping stitches is that you can use up your threads that are maybe a bit too thick to comfortably stitch with. So I've done 2 lines already. I've done this line here and this line here, and what I am using is, I had these were bought for me a few years ago. These are DMC Eco Vita. They're naturally dyed wool threads, and I do stitch with them sometimes, but you can only take short lengths because I find that they kind of disintegrate and come untwisted if I take my usual lazy girl length, so I use them sparingly. Also, they're just beautiful, and, you know, I mean, I will use them, obviously, it's silly just to keep them, but yeah, just I thought it would be nice to use them in this because I've got all these colours. I'll just talk about this box as well, because some of you may ask if you've not been here so long. This box was made of 4 patches with some eco-dyed threads and a plique, and then it was crocheted together, and there is a whole video tutorial on how to make this box if you want to know. You don't have to use eco-printed threads or anything, you know, but you could use whatever threads. What do you call this other stuff? Cloth. You don't have to use eco-printed cloth, you could use any kind of cloth. But there's a video, and I'll put that at the end, you know, the little suggested video to watch next. I'll put it there if you want to go back and watch that. That's called fusion quilting, when you use, you know, quilting or cloth and crochet together. Anyway, so that holds all my little sort of woolly threads, and these are my fancy threads from Jill up in Scotland, and just my threads that are a bit thicker. You know, that's some Appletons, that's Penelope actually, Cruel Wool. You know, there's stuff like that. So I chose out of my colours of my Ecovita kind of colours that represent nature to me. You know, the nature that I'm familiar with. Because bearing in mind that the black and white represents a sort of mundane, let's call it the everyday. Mundane and humdrum's a bit, you know, negative, isn't it? Let's call it just the everyday life. And for me, the everyday life involves in some way being in nature, whether it's just a little walk with Stella in the morning or whether I go to woods or the beach or whatever. That's important to me. So that's kind of the thread, and that's been since childhood. I grew up in the New Forest, and we would be on our bikes in the forest all day. The forest is not necessarily woodland. A forest denotes the king's hunting grounds traditionally. It doesn't have to be trees. A lot of it is heath. Just an aside, in case you don't know, when I talk about forest, there's a lot of heathland in the New Forest, and that's why. You can now hear the clock trying to chime, like I said. So yeah, so for me, from little, and going camping and going fishing with my dad and out on my bike with my friends in the New Forest and all that, nature has been a common thread for my whole life. I've never really lived in a city. At all, I don't think. I've lived in small towns, but towns where you can get to nature within a sort of 5-minute walk. So that for me is a common thread. For you, that common thread that runs through your life might be different. So you might want to choose your threading threads on some other grounds, you know, by some other criteria. So that's just to talk through that. So what I'm doing is, because I've kind of got cool colours and warm colours, and I had a sort of equalish amount of each in what I had available to me. I'm doing a cool colour, I like a green or a blue, going one way, and then I'm going to do a warm colour going the other way. But I'm just sort of mixing it up as I go along, really. So let's do the line I've just stitched. So I've got that thread in a needle. The other reason I don't use it a lot is I can't use it in one of my little needles. I have to get a big needle. And it's quite hard to thread. I don't have a needle threader. I've been through all my little box of old vintage needles, and you know, those little needle kits you pick up from wherever, to see if I could find, you know, one of those little needle threaders. But anyway, I couldn't find one. So what I have got here is a bookbinding needle, because it's got a big enough eye that I can easily thread it. But I have been using like a chenille needle, which is a bit shorter. I just don't want to be sitting here for hours with you all waiting for me. Well, you won't, I'll edit it out. But anyway, so I've just got a needle with a big eye. Obviously that will depend on what kind of thread you use. But you only need to come up at the beginning and go down at the end. The rest of the work is done on the surface of the cloth, and I will use the eye of the needle for that. So I've put a knot in my thread. So now it starts off like the whip stitch, which we've done before, which some of us refer to as the Marion stitch, because Marion over on Marion's World loves a whip stitch. So I'm going to come up at the beginning of this white stitch here, the first stitch on my line. So I'm just going to come up kind of somewhere in that corner, it doesn't exactly matter, with this great big needle, which might be a struggle, but I only have to do it twice. That wasn't too bad at all. Right. And then I'm going to use the eye of the needle because it's easier, and I'm going to go under that white stitch towards me. And I'm not going to pull it too tight. I want to leave it laying just gently. And that first one will kind of disappear under the stitch, but that doesn't matter. And then the next stitch, which is a black stitch, I'm going to come back the other way. And that's threading rather than whipping, and it just gives a different look. And the next white stitch, I'll come back towards me. Make sure I get all my threads of my thread, the threads of my thread, the strands of my thread, and then away from me. So it's exactly the same as whipping, only you go alternate sides rather than going from the same side all the time. And the whip stitch gives a kind of rope effect on the surface of the cloth, and this gives more of a kind of cable effect, I guess. So you just, but it's very satisfying to do, very mindful. Just weaving back and forth and just, see, I'm just letting it lay, I'm not pulling it up super tightly. Actually, this big needle is no bad tool for this job, it's quite handy. It's got quite a flat eye, although it's big, so it slides nicely under the stitching. If ever you're stitching with anything in any way and you're struggling, do take time to think maybe you've got a better tool for the job. Don't struggle on unless you have no other option. Try and change something. So now I've come to the junction, so I'm just going to go straight across and go under the next stitch as if that line wasn't there. And then when I come back to do the other line, I'll just cross it. So you can see that if I'd done a stitch across that, I would have trouble on that junction getting under just that stitch and not interfering with the stitches going the other way. My fridge has come on. That's the other sound you will get, obviously, because I'm sat in the kitchen and the fridge is a couple of yards behind my back. But I hope it's not disturbing. It's just signs of daily life. So I'm just going to go ahead doing that all the way along to the other side. Okay, so I'm just about to go under the last stitch, which is that one, and then I'm going to go down through the same hole where that stitch is coming out of, or somewhere in that area, as best I can, just straight through to the back. Not pull it too tight again, and then just go and finish off my wool on the back. If you don't have to have fancy thick threads. If all you've got is embroidery floss or pearl cotton or whatever, you can absolutely use that, but maybe if I was using embroidery floss I might use all 6 strands, or if I was using a pearl cotton that wasn't very thick, you could double it up, you know, use 2 strands. So don't feel you've got to go out, rush out and buy fancy threads. You absolutely don't have to. Right, so with that green I'm going to put one of my warm colours. Let's put this brown so maybe you can see it better. And then I actually pulled off too much of the green, but what I was doing is, because I know I only want that much, so I measure off that much, but I need a tiny bit more because I need to start and finish, plus it's going in a slightly wibbly line, so I just pull a few inches more, just so I don't waste my fancy thread by leaving a little tiny bit that's not, you know, not useful anymore. Just thread that, threaded quite easily, and tie a knot, and now basically, put simply, you just come back the other way. So you look there and you see that I've gone that way with the first one, so let's come up for starters. So we'll come up the other side of that stitch. So we're going to go under every stitch again, but this time in the opposite direction. So the wool's coming out this way, so I need to go that way. Now this time you'll be going under both the stitch and the green wool in my case, and the thing you threaded first. That's much easier to do that than try and get only under the stitch, I found. So this brown thread will end up underneath the green. But again, just go from side to side under every stitch and just not pulling it too tightly, just letting it lay, and you get this beautiful kind of cable effect on the surface of the cloth with the red and white going up through the middle. I'm going to do that all the way along. You do have to pay a little bit of attention because I a couple of times missed a stitch out. I started focusing on the black stitches, for example, when I was talking to Joey or we were watching something on television at the same time. So I just found I had to pay a little bit of attention to make sure that I went under every stitch and didn't just focus on, you know, the black stitches or the white stitches. So I'm just going to do that all the way along, and there's one more thing I want to do, so I'll be back to tell you about that. I've just come to the junction here, So there I need to get under quite a lot of things. So basically I'm just going to do the best I can. What I need to actually get under is this black stitch and the green wool. So I'm going to sort of jump over and work my needle in, make sure I'm under everything, and then not worry about the stitches going the other way. And that looks fine. And off I go again. So I'll be back when I've got to the other side. Okay. I just took that junction out again because I was going wrong. I could go back and edit and pull it all back and you'd never know, but I'm not gonna. I'm gonna tell you. What I did here was I whipped this one stitch, I whipped it instead of going to the other side in the green. So I'm not going to pull it all out. I'm going to come back here how I should be. And I'm just basically going to bodge it because I don't want to pull all that out. I could, of course. So here I'm still right. I go back that way. And now this stitch here, I don't know if you can see, some of you maybe noticed when I was stitching before, I don't know if it's a bit when I was talking or not, but I need to come back this way, but that will mean that I'm coming out the side of the green. So I am going to come back that way, and I'm going to go through the cloth to the back, just under there somewhere. So it's just basically me trying to make it look right and not have to pull all that green out. And then I'm going to come back up on the other side just next to that black stitch where I should be. And there will be a tiny little discrepancy there, shall we call it, but I don't think anybody's going to notice. I can live with that. If you can't, then obviously you would, and you'd done that same thing, you would have to take it out. But I just thought I'd leave it in just to show you that I made a mistake and how I chose to deal with it. So I'm just going to carry on now. I'm back on track. Yeah, you just have to concentrate a little bit, apparently, a little bit more than I was. So I'll just carry on doing the brown all the way along, and then I'll be back when I've done. Hopefully without making any more mistakes. Okay, so there we go. So here is the boo-boo. It's barely noticeable. It just means that there's a little bit of green that's wrapped around the stitch rather than woven under it from side to side. And then there's two little bits of brown next to each other instead of alternating with the green. But in the grand scheme of things, that doesn't worry me. Okay, so I will carry on and do that, and I'll do all the short lengths first with the threading, and then I'll go back and do all the long lengths, and then I think I'll go all the way around the edge with probably the same, you know, the same two colours to frame it. But I still think that I need to do something else in here. There's still unstitched cloth. So what I've got is I've got some of this silk that I've had for years that I dyed with buddleia a long time ago, dead buddleia flowers. And so this is the last little bit I've got, and I've been using it here and there throughout the coverlet, sort of sparingly. So I thought I could use some of this just to echo those little squares. Now I'm really sorry, it's Wednesday today. It is already gone 11 and you need this video this afternoon, and the clocks have gone back here in the UK, so we're back on Greenwich Mean Time, and these videos go up at 3 PM Greenwich Mean Time. So yeah, I just haven't got time to do all that and show you it all finished, I'm afraid, at the end of this video. But hopefully I've shown you enough. Sorry, these are super long. Hopefully I've shown you enough for you to go and finish your own stitching, and then next week I'll show you it finished at the beginning of next week's video when we start with November's prompt. And also I'll, if I've had time, it just depends, you know, like with Jerry being here, obviously I want to dedicate time to him. Join it to the September piece and join it to the coverlet. Hopefully I will have done all that. So I've got 2 strands of this because it's about the same thickness as embroidery floss, and that's the thickness I like. quite a long bit, but anyway. So if you're going to stitch around things, it would be annoying really to have to stop and start with every square, you know, end your thread. Well, it would be annoying for me. Maybe it's not annoying for you, but you know. So what I do is I kind of try and plan it so that I can do the minimum of changing the thread. So if I look at this, if I stitch them as little 4 patches, I mean I can do that 1, 2, like here's a 4 patch, here's a 4 patch, here and here, and then the last line I'll do something else. So I will start in the centre here and go around this one, jump across, go around that one, jump across, go around that one, jump across, go around that one, and then I'll have to break off my thread and start again. So that's just a little tip in case, I'm sure you've already thought of that, but anyway. So, but all I'm going to do with this, I think, is I'm just going to, because my spacing's all over the place around my squares, I'm just going to go halfway the space, no matter how wide that or narrow that space is. So I'm going to look down this side and see I need to be somewhere there, and there I need to be somewhere there. I'm just doing it by eye, so I need to come up about there. And I think I'm just going to do a simple running stitch, just because I find that bit of unstitched linen a bit floofy, and so it would be nice with the stitching to just give it a different texture. But also I'm using the gold to kind of highlight these, so I've got caught around my pins in my pin cushion, to highlight these little squares like it's a little halo or something, or a glow, a glimmer, you know, the light, the shiningness of them. Is that a word, shiningness? You know what I mean. So as I come up here again, I'm just judging where I need to end up to turn the other way, but I will go through to the back and turn it so I don't get the wonky donkey on the change of direction. And then come across here and go around there, and off I go again. And I think it's, you know, I think it's a nice change to do this sort of graphic kind of stitching, because we've done quite organic stitching here and there mostly. Yeah, some elements have been graphic. I mean, the cloth weaving in itself is graphic, the log cabins back in February, but I think this grid, you know, the mosaic grid just sort of lent itself to it really. This is a super long thread. Again, just if you have trouble eyeballing and you haven't got handy lines in your cloth, you could just lay your needle on, and then that kind of, you can visualise from that where your halfway mark is, or you know, wherever it is you need to be. So I'm just going to go around these little squares. So I'm going to do this as well around every square. I'm not going to do it now, like I said. I'm going to just doing this to show you. I shall go back and finish all my threading. Somewhere there. I just think it finishes it off. So I've probably just got time to go and finish a couple more lines of stitching here. I quite like to get, I might get the start of some of these lines in. Just, I'm now thinking for the photograph, you know, because I have to do the photograph for the thumbnail so that you can see what it's supposed to be. So I might do a bit of shenanigans and you know, just start threading and then just leave the tails hanging off shot. But I'm being honest and telling you that that's what I'm doing. Right, there we go. So now I'm going to shoot through to the back. And now I need to come up over here somewhere from my blue one. So I need to come up halfway, that's narrow space. I need to come up somewhere there. So I'll poke my needle in, turn it over. Don't push a needle through, but just mark that point. And then if it's a big jump, you can just bite a little bit of backing. And then go through that little hole so you're in the right spot. and then go around this square in the same way. So I hope you've enjoyed this month and what I see in the Facebook group and what I hear here in the comments you have. Looking forward to next month. We've only got 2 more months to go. And my thinking at the moment is, a couple of people asked that November and December will just be their pieces, you know, they'll just be the section with their theme and their story, the same as we've been doing all along. And then going into the new year, I will carry on making videos for the Coverlet of Comfort, because I've got my moon square border that I want to put around mine, and I know some of you have done that as well, and some of you might want to do some different kind of border. And then all the finishing off techniques that are required, whether it's if you want to back it, if you want to put some kind of binding or some other way of finishing the edging. I'll carry on making videos into the new year, as long as I feel I've got things to tell you and as long as you're asking for things. And then maybe for the last video in this Coverlet of Comfort series, which feels a bit sad to be saying it actually, but that's a little way away. In advance of that, I will ask you for if you've got any questions. So I'll say, for example, I might say something like, next week I'm going to make the last Coverlet of Comfort video. So if you've got any questions at all, please, you know, leave them for me. Don't do it now. This is what I'll do then, because I'll have to go back and look and it'll be a nightmare. And then I'll do a final video answering all your questions, hopefully, if there are any outstanding questions. So don't worry now about how we're going to finish it. We'll be going into the new year to do that. This year is only about the actual making of it, the making of the sections. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So I hope that's alright. I don't think you need to watch me do running stitches for hours. So I'm just going to go and finish off this little going around these, but you get the idea of how it's going to look. And yeah, do what I can to take a decent photo. Okay, since I was doing this anyway for the photo, I thought I would just show you how to deal with the junctions here when you've got your threading stitches in, you know, on that way. Here to this middle, it's the same principle really as before, and you've got to get under everything. So I'm looking for that white stitch under there. That's what I need to get under. So I'm going to need to go under these top 2 bits of wool that I threaded, and the stitch that they're through, and the white stitch. So you just need to poke your needle right in and make sure you're completely underneath everything. And then just pull it through, and then it looks, you know, it makes visual sense, shall we say. And then coming back the other way, obviously, with your other colour, you'll just do the same in the other direction. So I am going to carry on with this bit of green until I get past here, but I'm not going to stitch on here because I need to get those ones in first, otherwise it'll be very tricky to get under, you know, only the threads I want to get under. So I'm going to go past there with my lime green, and then I'm going to go and get my next colour and stitch it the other way, and then I'm going to do the same there and leave the tails hanging, just so I can take a pretty picture for you. So anyway, so I hope that made sense and is useful, and I'm going to go on with this and say thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to you joining me next time for more cloth tales, and sending you lots of love, and I shall park my needle to say kisses and wave. Bye bye.